Ida, a very serious threat unfolding for much of South Louisiana, Southwest Mississippi, and the northern Gulf Coast. This continues to trend in a bad direction. There's no sugarcoating it. The news has not been good over the last 24 hours and has not improved in any form or fashion as it relates to our part of the world. So let's get into it. We'll kind of walk you through what's going on this morning with Ida, what we do know, some of the forecast guidance, potential impacts, and I'll try to take some questions at the end. So especially if you're watching on Facebook, we'll take them via the comments, and I'll try to get to as many as I can. But today, tomorrow, the days to get preparations done in advance of what could be a major impact to much of South Louisiana. Here is the wide look on satellite this morning, and I think you can note, look at the last couple of frames. Thunderstorms really erupting around the center here as this moves from the Cayman Islands now up towards northwestern Cuba. So it looks like we may be entering a phase of some fairly significant intensification. We've already seen that winds have gone up from 45 to 65 miles per hour this morning, and it is possible this could now become a hurricane before even reaching western Cuba, which was not in the forecast before this. Let's give you a look at the visible satellite. So here is our core right in here, and from Hurricane Hunter observations, we've had at least 3 different Hurricane Hunter aircraft out there this morning, 2 of them flying the low-level missions that really kind of focus in on what's going on with the core of the storm. I think one was more the high-altitude aircraft where we kind of get a better idea of the environment around the storm. But ultimately what they're finding is the center is probably tucking itself under this blow-up of thunderstorms this morning, and the core is becoming much better organized. So with that, one thing to kind of keep an eye on through the day today, now that we're getting a core that is pretty well developed and a center that's pretty well developed, forecast guidance should become more reliable, although we've already seen over the last 24 hours there hasn't been a whole lot of shifting. So now that we've got a very trackable center, let's see if there are any changes, but right now there have not been any significant changes. So let's give you a look at the advisory. Just came out a little while ago. Let me back that up for a second. I apologize. Did not have a pause in there. So it's on the left side of the screen also. And now just lost my graphic. Again, as we give you a look at the advisory now, as of 10 a.m., 20.7 north, 82.1 west, to 75 miles southeast. This is the Isle of Youth here in Cuba. Winds up to 65 miles per hour, moving northwest at 15. Pressure dropped overnight and early this morning, another sign of strengthening. So now let's give you a look at that forecast. Potentially becoming a hurricane later today. Certainly it looks like by tomorrow morning as it emerges in the southeastern Gulf. The Hurricane Center now has us a Category 2 by tomorrow night in sort of the central or east central Gulf of Mexico, and by Sunday morning a Category 3 major hurricane off the coast of Louisiana. Note the wind speeds, 120 miles per hour, and they keep the landfall intensity around that, which is a slight nudge up from the prior advisory issued at 4 a.m. Now showing a landfall intensity around 120 miles per hour, a Category 3. From there, moving inland, and you can see the track is really very similar to what we had earlier this morning, and really hasn't changed a whole lot since yesterday. There's been some small adjustments left and right, but nothing major, and it's a bad track as it stands right now for pretty much all of the WAFB viewing area, all of southeast Louisiana, all of southwest Mississippi. It's a bad look. So if you look at the timestamps here, landfall maybe closer to Sunday evening. One thing you might note is a little bit of change in timing. So, you know, we've got a cone here. If this does make landfall more on the right side of the cone, the landfall probably happens a little bit earlier in the day on Sunday as well. But the farther west it goes, it just gives it a little more time over water. It takes a little longer to get to land. So right now, landfall is shown at Sunday evening, and we'll get into this in a little more detail in a few minutes. But ultimately, for those around Metro Baton Rouge, that could mean the worst of the impacts overnight Sunday into Monday morning. Never like to see that overnight type stuff, but it does look like that's a very real possibility. Other new information with the 10 a.m. advisory. The hurricane watch has now been expanded farther inland. It now includes all of our parishes in southeast Louisiana, and in fact pretty much all of Acadiana, and even into areas around Jeff Davis Parish. As far west as Lake Charles in the blue, that's a tropical storm watch. That extends up to Alexandria. Our counties up here in southwest Mississippi, that's also a tropical storm watch, and that hurricane watch extends as far east as the Mississippi-Alabama border. I expect to see a flash flood watch coming out from our local National Weather Service office at some point. That hasn't happened yet, but that's pretty much a certainty at this point. We also have a storm surge watch. It does look like they expanded that to include now all of the Louisiana coastline and all of the Mississippi and Alabama coast. It also surrounds Lakes Pontchartrain and Maurepas. Storm surge watch means there's a threat of life-threatening storm surge, rising water within the next 48 hours. Here are the updated storm surge values as of the 10 a.m. advisory. For the most part, these were kept the same as the previous advisory. There was one change, and I kind of hinted on 9 News this morning that this was possible. They did increase the values in Lakes Pontchartrain and Maurepas a little bit. In Lake Pontchartrain now 4 to 6 feet of surge is forecast. In Maurepas it's 3 to 5 feet. Now as we go along the coast, Morgan City eastward, wrapping all the way around, all the way over to Ocean Springs, Mississippi, 7 to 11 feet. Very dangerous storm surge levels. Morgan City westward over to the Rockefeller Wildlife Refuge in Cameron Parish, that's 4 to 7, and then much of Cameron Parish west of that, 2 to 4 feet. We've got 3 to 5 feet from the well, we've got 4 to 7 from Ocean Springs eastward to the Mississippi-Alabama border, 3 to 5 coastal Alabama into Mobile Bay. Far-reaching impacts. Hopefully you noticed that looking at the storm surge here, so that kind of clues you in. You know, it's human nature. Some meteorologists beat up on people for following the exact track in the line. I'm not one to do that. I think that's human nature. We all do that, right? We want to know where that track is going to fall relative to our location, because we're all pretty hurricane wise in this part of the world, and we know the significance of whether we fall on the left side or the right side of the track. But it is important to note, not only could this be a powerful hurricane coming ashore in Louisiana, some indications it could be fairly sizable. So with that, impacts would be far-reaching, and it may not be as important where exactly you fall relative to the exact track. And even on the west side, there will be significant impacts from this storm. Let's give you an updated look at the tropical storm wind probabilities. Really no major changes with this. One thing I like to point out on this graphic, where you kind of get into the shade of orange, where it transitions from yellow to orange, that's sort of the 50-50 threshold of sustained tropical storm force winds. So look at how big of an area that covers, from basically the Texas-Louisiana border almost all the way up to Monroe, and then kind of dipping down over to the Alabama-Mississippi border. So again, evidence of what could be far-reaching impacts with the winds. So across our viewing area right now, those probabilities of sustained tropical storm force winds range anywhere from roughly to 70 to 90% plus, better than an 80% chance in Baton Rouge as it stands right now. Now, as we take a look at the hurricane wind probabilities, we're now nearing 50% down here in St. Mary Parish, as shown around Patterson, about a 1 in 3 chance. The 4 a.m. advisory had about a 1 in 3 chance in Baton Rouge. That's actually come down a little bit. I'm not quite sure I understand why, other than they show the inland intensity lowering maybe a little more quickly. Maybe that's why it happened, but you see how the track as it stands right now still comes right through Metro Baton Rouge. So if not sustained hurricane force winds, hurricane force gusts are a good bet for anybody that's near this track, well inland. Okay, so have your mind wrapped around that idea as well. Now, this is the most likely arrival time of sustained tropical storm force winds. I didn't get the chance to fully update this graphic, so let me see if it's still kind of accurate. Yeah, so there's kind of some text overlap, but if you can make out this black line here, still showing most likely that we start to get tropical storm force winds arriving along the coast early Sunday morning, gradually spreading inland. So this next line that's just north of Baton Rouge, that's showing 8 p.m. Sunday. So basically tropical storm force winds starting out along the coast Sunday morning and gradually building inland during the day on Sunday, and things for many of us around Metro Baton Rouge especially getting worse Sunday night into early Monday. We give you a look at a few different model perspectives on the wind field. Now it's important to note these are forecast wind gusts, not sustained, but boy, still some big numbers on the board. I'm going to show you 3 different model scenarios, and each one has a little bit of a different track, but none of them have a good scenario for southeast Louisiana, no matter what the exact track is. So we pick up the GFS model here. This is 8 a.m. Sunday. At that point in time, it's already got some of those tropical storm force winds along the immediate coast. So as you watch this graphic visually, some important clues to look for. Where you go from the blue to the green, that's the threshold of tropical storm force winds. And then where you go from sort of the red, the deep red, to more the purple magenta down here, that's where you go from tropical storm to hurricane force winds. So we'll advance this now, and by Sunday evening, you can see hurricane force wind gusts spreading through our coastal parishes, tropical storm force winds into Metro Baton Rouge, the North Shore, across Acadiana, extending east through New Orleans to coastal Mississippi. So again, look at the far-reaching impacts. On the model here, you've got tropical storm force winds, at least in gusts, from coastal Alabama almost all the way over to Lake Charles. That's why the exact track is not necessarily as important this time, because the wind field may be fairly large. That's 7 p.m. Sunday. We advance it now. And obviously, this would be a real ugly track for Metro Baton Rouge. This is one, the GFS right now is very similar, kind of what the National Hurricane Center shows. So what you note here, 3 a.m. Monday, well, there's hurricane force winds. You see that sort of purple shade spreading into Metro Baton Rouge. So again, could be overnight Sunday into Monday if something close to this plays out, that the strongest winds start to overspread the area. But really all of southeast Louisiana being impacted with strong winds and extending up into southwest Mississippi. By daybreak Monday, the GFS has the center of the storm really passing right over Metro Baton Rouge. That's why the winds drop off a little bit here in the model, but you can still see some winds approaching, some gusts at least approaching hurricane force daybreak Monday, and then through the day on Monday gradually lifting northward. 1 o'clock we still see some tropical storm force gusts. By Monday evening those start to let up. Now here's a look at the European model. Daybreak Sunday morning, tropical storm force winds already along the coast of southeast Louisiana. Now the European model takes the storm a little farther west. So as a result, the timeline here is a little bit slower than what I just showed you with the GFS. 7 o'clock Sunday evening, we've got tropical storm force winds starting to make their way up to near I-10. We start to get some hurricane force gusts showing up along the coast. And then here comes the eye of the hurricane, the center. By daybreak on Monday, you see this large hurricane force wind field. This track like the European would imply a greater threat to those of you watching from, say, Acadiana and west of the Atchafalaya Basin. But hurricane force gusts moving into Metro Baton Rouge by daybreak on Monday on the European, and then it's lifting it northward from there. So even though this track is a little farther west, still a really bad setup for Metro Baton Rouge and most of our viewing area. Now, one area where a track like the European would help a little bit is anybody that might be watching from Metro New Orleans. That would be slightly better. Still would be some pretty significant impacts. You know, that if you're watching from the New Orleans area, that would be slightly better news. But really, it's ugly for everybody. So that's noon on Monday. It's got the center just east of Lafayette, and then brings the center up west of Baton Rouge during the day on Monday, still generating some hurricane force wind gusts in the Florida parish of southwest Mississippi Monday evening, and then lets up after that. Now, I showed you the GFS is kind of in the middle. The European's kind of to the left. Let me show you a model that's kind of to the right. This is the graph model. We pick it up daybreak Sunday. So as I pointed out earlier, if the track comes in right, everything, the timeline is sped up, okay? If it's sped up left, the timeline is slowed down. So with this track coming in a bit right here, you'll know by daybreak on Sunday, not only tropical storm force winds, but already hurricane force winds showing up along the immediate coast. Here's the eye of the storm. It's got to come in right through Barataria Bay near Grand Isle, kind of moving up to the west-northwest. This is a particularly ugly track for the coastal parishes here south of New Orleans, but New Orleans proper as well. That would be a really bad one. Tropical storm force winds into Baton Rouge by 1 o'clock Sunday on that particular track. You see in the purple, though, the large hurricane force wind field. During the day on Sunday, those winds gradually spreading inland. So it initially goes west-northwest, bends it back to the north a little bit, and tracks it between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. So on a course like that, it would be slightly better news in Metro Baton Rouge, but still significant impacts. It would be probably much better news in Acadiana. So you see how some adjustments left and right can still be important, but everybody gets impacted one way or another. So that's Sunday evening at 7 o'clock, and then the model run ends here just after midnight going into Monday morning, but still some tropical storm force winds showing up. So as I said, 3 models, 3 tracks that are each a little bit different, but they're all ugly in a sense for southeast Louisiana. Let me plot the timeline of tropical storm and hurricane force winds for Baton Rouge using the probabilities from the National Hurricane Center. So if you can make out, I don't know how well you can read, some of you probably watching on phones, maybe a little hard to read. This vertical line, that's 10 a.m. Sunday, this one is 10 p.m. So you'll note where this peak shows up, that's Sunday night through about midday on Monday, and then slowly seeing things improve Monday afternoon, Monday evening. So right now the thinking is worst of the weather wind-wise in Metro Baton Rouge is Sunday night through about midday on Monday. Those are the tropical storm force winds, and really the same story if we were to get hurricane force winds, most likely late Sunday night into early Monday. These are the updated probabilities, around 82% chance of tropical storm force winds, 23% chance of hurricane force in Baton Rouge, according to the NHC. Again, I was a little surprised to see those numbers come down slightly. I wouldn't make too much of that at this point. Here's the rainfall outlook from NOAA's Weather Prediction Center. So we talked about what a significant threat the winds are going to be. Water is going to be a big threat. We showed you the storm surge, but also rainfall and inland flooding could be a major problem. So you can kind of make out the forecast track on this product, but as I bring it in closer to our area here, right now they've got from just east of Lafayette through most of Metro Baton Rouge, 5 to 10 inches of rain. That would include Iberia, St. Mary parishes up through Metro Baton Rouge and into much of southwest Mississippi. And then as you go just east of Baton Rouge, if you can make out more of the yellow shading, that's 10 to 15 inches of rainfall just east of Baton Rouge, the North Shore, South Shore, Metro New Orleans, back to Terrebonne, Lafourche parishes, and there's even a little bullseye of 15 inches plus showing up here on the South Shore. So that general idea we talked about yesterday of 5 to 15 inches of rainfall still holds right now, and obviously could go higher in spots. So when you think about 5 to 15 inches of rain coming down, we've already got winds coming in out of the east and southeast, which is going to be pushing water into Lakes Pontchartrain and Maurepas, but especially once that surge starts arriving, it's a real bad equation. So on top of everything else, now we're going to have to watch the wind, the storm surge, the rain. Once the rain comes down, we'll then have to see where the heaviest comes down and how much of a rise we start to get on the rivers. It's a little too early. I know that the rivers, especially around the Baton Rouge area, make a lot of you nervous. It's a little too early, unfortunately, to really get into details on how high they might get, because you really have to kind of nail the placement of the rain to get accurate forecasts on the rivers. And being 48 plus hours out from landfall, it's very difficult to do that at this point in time, but just understand that threat of river flooding is a very real one. Let's compare the GFS and European models now in another fashion. So I showed you this yesterday. Remember the circles here, these are representing the pressure. The more circles you see show up on the model, the more intense the storm. So the red is the GFS, the blue is the European. tonight, 7 o'clock, they're pretty much on top of each other over western Cuba. We advance it to Saturday, 7 o'clock. Still pretty much sitting right on top of each other. At this point, the GFS is stronger than the European, but they're pretty much in lockstep. So we have fairly high forecast confidence through tomorrow night in the track. There's very little divergence among any of the models. They're pretty tightly clustered. Now, as we advance it, this is where we start to see a little bit of the spread developing. Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock, the GFS in red has it kind of due south to Terrebonne Bay. The European is just slightly west, still very close. The GFS looks a little more intense at this point. So that's Sunday at 3 o'clock, but the GFS brings it inland a bit more quickly. So here we are Monday morning. The GFS has it kind of starting to lift north of Baton Rouge. The European is still southwest of Baton Rouge, but both of them, real troubling trend here, both of them. And really, most of our available guidance is doing this. This is the real issue. Shows the storm strengthening right on through landfall and then lifting northeastward. But you get the idea as you look at those two, not a whole lot of divergence in the models. Can show you that with the spaghetti plots too. Tonight at 7 o'clock, they're clustered. Look at how tightly clustered they are 7 o'clock tomorrow. So again, pretty high confidence in the track through tomorrow evening. And then as we advance it through Sunday evening, this is largely the Canadian model that brings it inland and northward a bit more quickly. Probably can discount that a little bit, but it's Sunday night into Monday morning that most of the models start to show the landfall and more of that hook to the north. There's some spread there, but not a lot. And that's why this just looks to be a really bad scenario for much of southeast Louisiana. If you're with me yesterday, I showed you this as well, but it's worth showing once again. Not water temperatures we're looking at. This is a representation of where the warm water is deep. Okay, so a couple of important things to note. Number one, Northwestern Caribbean, that magenta purple shade there, this is almost always where the deepest, warmest water is located really anywhere in the Atlantic Basin. So Ida is already hitting some of that. That could be part of the reason it's intensifying this morning. And then right here, this is what we call the loop current that extends northward from western Cuba, northward into the Gulf of Mexico. That's also some very deep, warm water. And unfortunately, the forecast track takes it right over that loop current. So, for example, I always hesitate to bring up past storms because then people immediately mentally start equating them, you know, as if it's going to be exactly the same. I don't want to do it in that fashion, but storms, for example, that have fed off of the loop current include Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Hurricane Rita in 2005, really benefited from moving over this real deep, warm water. Now, as I emphasized yesterday, it's not just about the water in the ocean. The atmosphere has to be working in concert with the ocean for storms to really intensify, but it does look like the atmosphere will gradually get more favorable the deeper this gets into the Gulf of Mexico. There's a bit of a warm eddy, so this loop current kind of circulates northward periodically. An eddy sort of pinches off and starts drifting westward, a warm eddy. So essentially this is a warm eddy right now, and again the forecast takes it right over it. So it's just that's a bad trend. That's just another thing that's not working in our favor. As we look at the water vapor loop this morning, we start to see the outflow. You see how the moisture here is starting to fan out. The outflow, the ventilation. So a tropical system's taking in air at the bottom. It's rising up. And for a tropical system to do well and to intensify, it needs good ventilation at the top. It needs a good chimney, a chimney that's operating well. Well, we're starting to see that ventilation improve this morning. That's another reason we're starting to see some intensification. Here's the upper low we've been talking about. Moved across the Gulf of Mexico. So that's been producing some southwesterly wind shear, south and southwesterly wind shear. Still a little bit there on the western side. We think that wind shear is gradually going to let up. In the short term, it's worth noting, not only is that upper low influencing some wind shear with Ida, this is also producing good rain chances today, and we could get some locally heavy rainfall today. So that's something else we have to watch out for. All right, before I take questions, I remind you, continuous updates in our First Alert weather app, WAFB.com/weather app, if you don't already have it installed. We'll be here throughout the entire weekend, obviously, to get you through this. We'll keep you updated on our coverage plan. If this track holds as it currently stands, at some point we will shift over to continuous coverage. I don't know yet when that will occur, but suffice to say, we'll give you a heads up and let you know. But in the meantime, we'll have all of our regularly scheduled newscasts. We'll do digital updates like this. We'll post updates in the app. We'll post on social media. We will be there on multiple platforms to help you get through this. All right, with that, let's go ahead and try and take some questions. If you have them, go ahead and pop them in the comments. Again, today, give me a moment. This runs on a couple of different Facebook pages. So let me open up my browser and try to get to those. And it does look like, okay. It's a little squirrely. Before I get to your questions, let me show you one thing. The Weather Service, I'm not sure I agree with the way they've handled this, but it is what it is. I'm going to pop up a graphic. They've issued a flash flood watch for parts of our area. Some of you may have already gotten that notification, and give me just a second. It takes me a second to get this loaded. But right now it looks like they're issuing a, oh, come on, computer. How many of you have screamed at your computer before? I don't know why it's doing that. It keeps closing on me. All right, looks like it's staying this time. All right, so there finally is a look at our flash flood watch, and that's only running 1 p.m. through 10 p.m. today. So what they're doing here is to try to cover that threat I just mentioned, some locally heavy rainfall today with this upper low that's coming across the Gulf of Mexico. So keep in mind, some locally heavy rain today. Last thing we need, obviously, but that's possible. Even tomorrow, there could be some locally heavy rainfall, but then the rain threat will really start to ramp up headed into Sunday night and on into Monday. All right, let me check on your questions now. Apologies for the hiccup there, but we'll try to get to it. So a couple other housekeeping notes as I load this up. I'll be doing 9 News. I'll be covering weather here at 9 News at noon today. We'll get an intermediate advisory from the National Hurricane Center at 1 p.m. and then the next full advisory will be at 4 o'clock. That's the next time we get an updated forecast track. All right, so look, and again, like I said, I'm not going to beat up on people. This is human nature, but first couple of things I saw were, what about Prairieville? What about Watson? We can't get down to specific communities when we're talking about something on a scale like a hurricane. We kind of walk through the impacts as we know it right now. Tropical storm force winds are likely area-wide. Hurricane force winds are probably going to impact a good chunk of the viewing area, if not most of the area, if the forecast track holds as it stands right now. 5 to 15 inches of rain on average. We talked about the storm surge numbers. I talked about how we can't really get into river numbers as of yet. So those are impacts, okay? Can't narrow it down to specific communities at this point in time. I know people want to hear that, but we just can't do it. Let me get back. Current track Gustav-like damage. You know, unfortunately, one of the messages I kind of uttered a couple of times on 9 News this morning, get your head wrapped around the idea this could be Gustav or worse, okay? So remember, Gustav came ashore as Category 2 in southeast Louisiana. Its intensity actually peaked down around Cuba as a Category 4. This was not one of the ones that was really just intensifying right on through landfall. It's Category 2. Right now, Ida is forecast to move through as a Category 3, and perhaps a track that could even be a little more impactful for some parts of our viewing area. And the wind speeds could be higher than what we saw with Gustav in some areas. So, you know, again, we have to be careful with storm comparisons, but it's human nature, and I think it's fair to ask. So understand, this could be Gustav or worse if this forecast holds. And that should get your attention, right? That's not meant to scare. That's the reality of where we stand 10:40 on this Friday morning. Good question that I don't necessarily have the answer to. Kristen says, at what point will they call for mandatory evacuations? So the only one we had heard about was that Grand Isle was going to be calling for a mandatory evacuation about this time. The mayor, David Carmodale, put out a statement yesterday evening. They started with voluntary evacuations of Grand Isle yesterday evening, said they were going to have a meeting this morning with the 10 a.m. advisory coming out, and then probably call the mandatory for Grand Isle. Now remember, when we talk about evacuations are largely to get away from rising water, not so much wind. So the evacuation orders usually are mostly going to cover areas that are at risk of being impacted significantly by storm surge and rising water. Now, if you live in a mobile home or a structure that's not sturdy, you need to think about moving or evacuating to somewhere more safe, more sturdy. And then you get into comfort level sort of things, right? One reason we don't tell everybody to just evacuate is we don't want to create a log jam on the roads of people that really don't need to leave, right? We want to leave the roads as open as possible for those that are most at risk of that storm surge flooding. Now, a key point that I've been messaging behind the scenes as I get questions, a key point to track here when we talk about evacuations is, does it get bad enough to where the city of New Orleans calls an evacuation? And that's where, we get into severe impacts on the roads. That has not happened at this point. I have no information on whether it will happen, but it's a possibility, right, given what we're looking at. So if that happens, that really ups the ante. Then you get more into the conversation about contraflow and really need to consider that. What I can tell you on evacuations is listen to your local officials, your emergency managers. We will pass on any evacuation orders. And if you're thinking about leaving, get to where you're going by tomorrow night, Saturday night. You don't want to be trying to move on Sunday. Weather's going to be going downhill. There could be a number of issues to wrestle with. So figure it out today. Get where you're going by tomorrow night if you are leaving or thinking about leaving. So I think I answered Rebecca's question. I live in a mobile home in Baton Rouge. Would you advise us to evacuate? I would seriously think about it. You still have some time to kind of think that over and maybe come up with a plan, but I would certainly seriously consider it. Is the east side worse? Yeah, that's always the case. The east side's going to be a little bit worse. But there are storms where the west side can still be awfully nasty, especially if you get an eye wall wrapping around. The eye wall sometimes can be really healthy on the west side. Gustav at times had an eye wall that got really nasty on the west side. So I don't want to overplay that point about the east side being the worst. And especially as I kind of talked about for those that were with you earlier on, that were with me earlier on the presentation, wind field could be pretty big here. And so the wind impacts could be fairly far-reaching. Kelsey says, anyway, this could shift more east and BR would be more on the west side. Absolutely. I showed you, for those that were with me, I showed a model run that does just that. But it still brings significant winds into Metro Baton Rouge. The point I made when I ran through 3 model scenarios that showed wind fields is none of the 3 were good for southeast Louisiana. It was really just narrowing in on who got the absolute worst of it. And that's still to be determined, right? We're still talking probably more than 48 hours from landfall. So forecast errors at that lead time average around 100 miles or so. That's still a pretty big difference. The 100 miles is greater than the distance from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. So if you take a track that we're, say, right now, if we take the center line of the National Hurricane Center track, it comes almost over, maybe just slightly west of Baton Rouge. If you shift that 100 miles east, yeah, that's going to be pretty significant improvement and a pretty dramatic reduction in impacts here locally. But right now, there's not a whole lot of guidance that does that. Most of the guidance brings us close to, if not a little bit west of Baton Rouge. So that's why our level of concern for the Baton Rouge area is high, but it's really high for all of southeast Louisiana and southwest Mississippi and coastal Mississippi, and there are going to be impacts to Alabama, the Florida Panhandle. Cat 4 or 5 possible. Yeah, we can't, you always hate to say that. So, a general rule of thumb we use as meteorologists when we talk about this, right now landfall is forecast as a Category 3. Meteorologists and emergency managers like to say best to prepare for a category higher than forecast. So let's have in our minds that a Category 4 is not out of the question. That's kind of a mind-blowing thought to think about, right? And the official forecast is Category 3, but consider it. We saw some of this with Laura last year. The earlier forecast certainly didn't have it coming ashore at nearly Category 5 intensity. But things like that can happen. So we need to pay attention and be alert and be ready for changes. So I've been answering some questions here on my page. Let me hop over to our WAFB Facebook page so I can kind of mix this up. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of people asking about specific locations. All right. I see somebody mention about hotel in Baton Rouge. So one thing, my personal opinion here, there are, and I'm communicating with my own family right now in the New Orleans area, but certainly a lot of people in the New Orleans area right now are trying to make that decision whether to evacuate. Obviously, New Orleans always has that rising water threat, which is much higher, a bigger concern down that way. I would not recommend having family or friends evacuate from the New Orleans area to Baton Rouge, okay? Unless that's really your only option. If that's the only option to get away from potentially the threat of water and coming up here with the understanding that you could deal with some very significant wind, power outages, and some heavy rainfall and flooding, maybe, but it is far from the optimal scenario. I would not advise having people evacuate New Orleans to Baton Rouge. Quick story, I was a junior in high school as Hurricane Andrew approached Louisiana in 1992. Growing up in Metairie, all my family was in New Orleans. My grandparents got nervous. As Andrew's coming across South Florida, they evacuate up here to Baton Rouge. My parents then get nervous about my grandparents being alone, say, all right, we're going up to Baton Rouge. And our family ended up with worse weather being here in Baton Rouge than we would have been staying down New Orleans. So be real careful with that, okay, in your evacuation scenarios. Better to get farther away from the path of the storm, right? Let me pull up the forecast cone here, because I do think this is an important point, and I know this is one of the more stressful decisions that people are wrestling with right now. So the forecast cone can help illustrate this a little bit. So, as we look at this cone right here, a place like Houston is going to be much better off. Maybe even a Shreveport, anything here in East Texas you could find. If you're going to go east, go significantly east, okay? The impacts are going to extend well into Mississippi, maybe even western Alabama. There could be some flooding rains well east of the center. You've got to remember that. So the best advice, the optimal scenario in my mind, is to just head west and try to get pretty far west if you can, if thinking about evacuating or if you're trying to help family figure that issue out. My daughter and her family are in Morgan City. Should they evacuate? Listen to local officials, right? It's my best advice. It's hard for me to make specific recommendations, not knowing the structure that a family is in, your personal comfort level with when the weather gets real bad. your preparedness. What kind of supplies do you have on hand? What's your family situation? Are there there's too many issues for me to try and give everybody personal evacuation advice. Best I can do is kind of give you what the impacts are and then educate you and let you try to make those decisions. But obviously, in a place like Morgan City, right along the coast, very near the coast, the impacts are only going to be worse. Okay, so the evacuation, certainly more of a necessity the closer to the coast you are. Valerie's saying what category when it hits. Right now, forecast at Category 3. Remember, we just said not a bad idea to have in your mind. Better to prepare for a category higher. Let's see, more specific location questions. Joanna asking about tornado threats. So usually, as we look at our forecast track right now, usually the tornado threat is a little bit higher, a little bit removed from the center actually. And a lot of times that actually occurs more in the outer bands. Certainly it's the northeast quadrant that has more of that tornado threat. Generally speaking, as you go west of the center, the tornado threat really drops off. But yeah, almost likely that parts of southeast Louisiana and Mississippi will go under a tornado watch at some point, maybe on Sunday. So have that in mind. Often in tropical systems, tornadoes are on the weaker side, but there are exceptions. Some of you might remember a big exception. Hurricane Andrew in '92 had a strong tornado come through the Laplace area. So it happens. That's another hazard, no doubt. Sarah's saying comparison of general rainfall estimates to Gustav and or 2016 flooding. I got to admit, I don't remember the rainfall numbers all that well for Gustav. Gustav was such, for me, was memorable as our windstorm, right, in the Baton Rouge area. I don't remember rain being a huge issue with Gustav. So 2016, the peak rain numbers were on the order of 20 to 30 inches, especially in northern and northeastern parts of EBR and northwestern parts of Livingston. That's where I had some 20 to 30 inch rains. Right now, we're forecasting 5 to 15 inches of rainfall on average, but it certainly can go higher. One of the things that almost always happens with tropical systems, you get some isolated but narrow but very persistent and heavy rain bands that go higher than forecast. So 5 to 15, that's not 2016 type flooding, but it still is could be significant spots. But we don't know where the heaviest is going to fall, okay? But yeah, flooding is a real concern. All of the hazards here are on board and concerning with this storm. Let's see. Is West Monroe a safe place to go? Yeah, the farther north you get, it's okay. It's not to say West Monroe won't get some heavy bands. Maybe it's not a question, get maybe some tropical storm force wind gusts, but certainly better than anywhere down here in South Louisiana. And I really don't want to get too much into commenting on specific evacuation points either. All right, let's one more peek here before we wrap it up. This is a fair and good question. Yvonne asked, is it expected to be slow moving? I think you can see a little hint of that is reflected in the official forecast. And this is another thing, we've got to watch closely. It could be a little problematic. So Sunday evening at 7 o'clock, the forecast is shown right along the coast. Monday morning at 7 o'clock, 12 hours later, near Baton Rouge. So what's the distance on that? Let me see if I can try to get a measurement for you. Let me grab my measurement tool. So it's roughly 90 miles in 12 hours. So that's moving at about 8 miles per hour. It's a little bit on the slow side for a tropical system, not real unusual, but it's slow enough that only makes the impacts worse, right? With keeping the winds around longer, and certainly with the heavier rain potentially lasting longer. So that's a good question. There are some, let's say, modest concerns about the storm slowing down near or after landfall. Not a stall. I'm going to emphasize that. Nothing showing a stall, but it for a time could be moving somewhat slowly. So Michael said you showed the wind speed there at 70 on Monday. I'm not sure what location he's asking about. You know, suffice to say right now, tropical storm force winds are pretty much a guarantee area-wide. Hurricane force gusts look to potentially impact much of the area on this forecast track. So if anything close to this holds right now, you're talking at probably the majority of our viewing area at some point getting winds gusting over 75 miles per hour. Low perspective, couple of benchmarks. Gustav and Betsy in Baton Rouge produced some of our highest wind gusts on record in Baton Rouge. Both of those gusted around 90, 91, 92, something like that was the peak gust. Hurricane Andrew, officially at the airport, the peak gust in Baton Rouge was 70 miles per hour. A lot of people remember how bad the wind damage was with Andrew, but at the airport in Baton Rouge, we actually didn't even get a hurricane force wind gust. Now, there probably were hurricane force gusts around Metro Baton Rouge. You got to be careful with that. That's one spot. I know I was just looking at this because the anniversary of Andrew was yesterday. Looking back at some of the old reports, I think there was a report of Bruley having a sustained wind of 80 miles per hour, but those are a few of the numbers. Katrina gusted in the 50s here in Baton Rouge. I think it was the same with Rita, gusted in the 50s. So it gives you an idea. So this right now, winds worse than Katrina, worse than Rita, probably worse than Andrew, and could even get a little worse than Gustav and Betsy if this track holds and this intensity holds. But that's 48 plus hours out from landfall, so we will see how it plays out, but just have that in mind, that potential. All right, guys, I've got to wrap up. It's coming up on 11 o'clock. I've got to get ready for our noon broadcast, so be sure to watch me then. Jay Grimes will be here this evening. He'll get you through 4, 5, 6, and 10. The entire team's going to be here through the weekend getting you through it. As you know, if you followed me for any time, very active on social media. I'll be posting constantly there. And if I'm at times where I'm not at the station this weekend, probably might even do some updates from home just to bring you the latest. But please take this very seriously. Very significant threat unfolding for our area today and tomorrow. Still got a good bit of time to finish those preparations, but try to have it all locked down by tomorrow night. I'll see you back on air at noon.